Welcome everyone to our monthly Lunch and Learn series. If you're unfamiliar with our organization, Up2Us Sports, our mission is to engage, train, and support sports coaches to transform youth, programs, and communities. So the backbone of the work, our mission is the work being done by our partners, the local community sports organizations across the country, and of course, our Up2Us Sports coaches and Vista capacity developers. Our Lunch and Learn series is designed to be a space for all of us to join together, to share, to learn from each other, and to highlight incredible work from our partners. One quick note that I want to make here is this will be an interactive session. We encourage your participation through video, audio, the chat function, etc. Just like we did just now with our whiteboard and the poll function. But we also acknowledge that not everyone may be in that space. So if you're here to just listen, we just ask that you rename yourself and put an asterisk at the front of your name. Just for our information, we'll be doing some breakout rooms, I believe, later on. And so that'll help us ensure that we have enough participants in each room. So on to the exciting part. Today, we're joined by Dr. Natalie Smith from East Tennessee State University in the Department of Sport, Exercise, Recreation, and Kinesiology. Natalie is an assistant professor of sport and recreation management. Her research interests revolve around innovation and creativity in sports organization. She teaches classes on strategic management, entrepreneurship, international sport, organizational behavior, and esports. Prior to a career in academia, she worked in professional men's and women's soccer, including in the Major League Soccer League office and Sky Blue Football Club. Her 15-year soccer coaching career has spanned from under 6 recreation leagues to the collegiate level. So join me in welcoming Dr. Natalie Smith to our Lunch and Learn series.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here, in particular because Up2Us is something that I've heard about for a very long time. My college roommate / best friend worked for Up2Us for a good number of years. And one of my other close friends is currently working for Up2Us. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to share, it's going to be a little bit PowerPoint, but I promise it won't be too much PowerPoint. But I'm going to share that with y'all if my computer will let me. Okay, hold on. I broke my computer. So okay.
No problem. Okay.
I will have to have to come back right back in.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Be right back.
Do we throw the music back on? Yeah, that's what we do. Okay.
Vibe. You can do it.
We can do this. We're back on the whiteboard. I'm really hoping no one sees my screen here. There we go. Can we all appreciate Meredith's exercise during, the lunchtime exercise? It's awesome.
I am back.
Hey, there we go.
Sorry about that, everybody. One of the exciting parts about creativity is being adaptable. So this is gonna roll with it. If I can share my screen. Oh yeah, there we go. Then let's do it that way. All right. So as you said, I don't really introduce myself as much. So mostly it's just an excuse for me to go through back in some old photos and just have some reliving some moment days of I started coaching when I was 16. I've coached in multiple states and U6 through collegiate, mostly in soccer. and actually got the experience to volunteer at the annual coaching training back in 2013. And then as a player, I played in quotations for a reason. I played left bench in college. And I swam mostly because at Pomona we had 20 lanes. And so she was just like, hey, if we can afford a swimsuit for you, you're on the team. I've also tried, for those of you who are coaches of different sports, I've tried rugby, kung fu, track and field, softball, basketball. I am a lover of sports and terrible at all of them. I currently, I would say, not run in 5Ks, but trot. And then the photo down below is actually open water swimming. We have a lake here that is surrounded by national forest. And so I'm really lucky to be able to swim in that. Play pickup soccer and mostly go hiking because I live in a very rural area. So as an administrator, as you mentioned, I worked for Sky Blue FC, which we won the championship in 2009 when I was there. I had nothing to do with that. I just feel like it's called basking in reflected glory. For those of you who are in sport management style, you know that everybody likes to bask in other people's glory. And that's what I did when I worked there. Is that our players did an amazing job and we won the championship. And worked at Major League Soccer and the Women's Sports Foundation, where I met Jacqueline Miller, and in college athletics. And so I just have a really diverse set of experiences. And I think that maybe influences why I love this topic so much. So what we're going to do today, I'm just going to explain a little bit about creativity, because sometimes we have sort of unexpected, or we have misconceptions about what creativity is. And I loved everybody's submissions to the whiteboard, because I think a lot of you captured some of those aspects. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research. I personally love when people talk about research, because then I don't have to go read it myself. It's a great secret that professors are just as, we like the shortcuts just as much as everyone else. I'll talk a little bit about some of the research I've done on creativity and coaching, and then open it up for questions. And then we're gonna do some activities. So I'm gonna try to go through this relatively quickly so that we can get to those activities and get to your questions. And then obviously more time for questions, because questioning is an important part of creativity. So what is creativity? It's something that's new and useful to the unit of measure. And I'm very deliberate about that definition, because something can be new and not useful. As much as I would love my U6 players to like run some sort of, flat back four, like, let's be honest, that is not a new and useful idea for 5-year-olds. We're just like grateful that they don't, punch each other and, poke each other's eye out. And it's about the unit of measure, because we often conflate creativity at a much larger scale. And so I call that the big C. So whoever invented the sweeper position, or whoever invented the forward pass, which I'm sure somebody here knows in American football who invented that, but I can't remember, that those are big C things. Those are things that we've never seen before in sport or in society. The invention of the light bulb, right? That's a big C thing. When in reality, most creativity happens in the small c. And it's really about whatever unit of measure looks like to you. So whether that be you as a coach, or your team, or your program, that is, if you keep that in mind, creativity becomes much more manageable and much more possible for people. And then the next thing that people tend to confuse creativity with is copying other people's ideas. It's called mimetic isomorphism, but it's just copy and pasting other people's ideas. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to copy other people's ideas. In my teaching, I don't know if he sort of listed all these classes, right? I teach a lot of classes. I teach 3 classes a semester, sometimes 4. Is that I have to take other people's ideas, or I would not get to enjoy my weekends. but that's not creativity. Creativity may be taking other people's ideas and adapting them to your specific context. But it's really, the key is that it's new and useful to you. If it's simply just copying and pasting without recognition of whether it's useful to your team, to yourself, to your group, your organization, that's just copying, pasting, which in sport is a big problem. When I worked at Major League Soccer, one time somebody asked Fulham FC, which is an English soccer club, they asked them, why did you adopt video signboards? And the only response they could give was because Man United did it. And that to me is a great example of sort of what in sport, it's like, well, I saw so-and-so do it and they're successful, so then I copied that idea. So now that we kind of have an understanding of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about creative, and I will say it's also not your artistic ability. Some of you have great artistic ability. I've already seen it. But it's really just about ideas and whatever that sort of applies to. And so with ideas, those don't appear out of thin air. Maybe you're somebody who you already practice this a lot, so maybe it feels like they come out of thin air. But there's really a creative process that you do if you're somebody who's more creative, or you can watch if you want to become more creative. Excuse me, if you want to become more creative, this is sort of the process of that. So there's creativity, the ideas, the actual idea you have. Is it creative? Is it not? Really more of a spectrum. And then there's the process of it and the process of engaging in creativity. And this is very deliberate. We talked about deliberate practice. I actually teach an esports coaching class, which is amazing to me because it actually relates so much to what any sport coach does as well. And it's this idea of that deliberate practice. And so this is what we're going to be talking about when we engage in those creativity exercises, is this process from going from problem ID to info searching to idea generation. And I'll tell you, idea generation is the most fun. So we won't spend too much time on the first two, but this is when you think about how do I become more creative, this is a way you can do that. And again, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions, so I can always jump back into these. For those of you who maybe have never heard about this is a little bit much, but I also want to make sure that we have plenty of time. So why does this matter in sports? Who cares? I have actually had people say this to me. So like, who cares? Why? Great. You want creativity. This sounds fluffy. And it's not. Is that sports generally in the past, and this is research, and if anybody really wants to dig into the research, I have a ton of resources, feel free to reach out to me, is that sports is generally traditional and conservative. I'm sure that with Up to Us and all this, right, we talked about we're coached the way we were coached, or we coach the way we were coached. And this happens a lot in sport generally, is like, this is how we've always done it, so let's continue to do it that way. Things are changing. And some of that relates to the world, and how it's globalizing. And, as a result of that, and as the result of some shifting perceptions about sport, is that sport is becoming more competitive. Not just on the field, I'm talking mostly off the field. So there's more competition for resources. There's more competition, and this is something people don't take into account. There's more competition for participants. And so, there's more competition for eyeballs. I worked in mostly what at the time were niche sports, in women's soccer, in men's soccer. I was in men's soccer before it was cool. I feel like that's sort of the like hipster perspective. I was at Major League Soccer when the Portland Timbers joined the league, which was 11 years ago, which is insane to me. And so there is that increased competition, but that means creativity is more important than ever. And so, hold on. Because creativity could be a potential solution for dealing with all of this kind of competition that we have. And I'm not talking about on the field competition, because, obviously all of you are focused on player development, and player like social development and psychological development and physical development. So I'm not necessarily talking about wins and losses in this, although that sort of negates what's on the PowerPoint right now. But I'm really talking about creativity and helping solve the problems that you have. I will say, though, this is what the research says. And most of this research is not focused on youth sport, but it does indicate that creative players, and this isn't just for sports that, when we think about creativity, we think about sports, we think about those fluid dynamic sports, not necessarily ones where you have a play and you execute the play and that's it. But this involves multiple sports, is what this research says, is that creative players equals more wins. And beyond winning, because you're youth sport coaches, right? It's not about winning. I had to convince my parents of that every single time I went onto the field and coached my 7-year-olds in Park and Rec, Champaign, Illinois. It's also about engagement. And so players tend to have more fun. They tend to be more engaged, and they tend to have more satisfaction when they are allowed to be creative. But so all this research says this about players. We're always, right? It makes sense, right? We're focused so much on players, and we're focused so much on what's happening on the field. But as all of you are coaches, I have also been a coach for many years, and I'm like, well, I feel like we're kind of missing this large group of people. And if you want your players to be creative, don't you kind of need to go through this yourself and learn how to be a creative person? I have a slogan that I use a lot for myself, which is live it, teach it. And so if I expect my students to do something, I should be able to engage in it myself. And so that was sort of the motivation for the research that I've done with coaches, because I will tell you, the research is sparse, specifically about coaches. And so that really motivated me to look at, well, how do coaches engage in creativity? So I did a research project, and this is very exploratory, and this only happened last year. So if you want to talk to me more about this, and maybe we could do even bigger projects, I'm very into this. That I interviewed multiple coaches who work at a variety of levels within specifically women's soccer, because that was the area that I was focused on for this particular project. I interviewed them about their creative process and that creative process engagement. And so the key takeaways that I have, again, from a very small study, I'm not trying to indicate this is true of everybody, but that more experienced coaches spent more time on problem identification. So rather than immediately moving into how do I solve this problem, is that they would spend more time looking at, well, what does this problem mean? What are the underlying assumptions? Who are the stakeholders involved? They also found that idea searching and encoding was always about networks of support, which I love, because this is the first time I've been able to say that data to a bunch of people who are in a network of support. So I'm having a real meta experience right now. That is in fact very true. All of these coaches, and most of them were relatively successful, and I don't just mean on the field, I mean related to how their players ended up developing as people, is that they really utilized their networks of support, and they spent time developing those networks. And then what's really interesting for anybody here who's potentially interested in coaching long term is that more stable coaches felt more comfortable failing in idea generation. So, as many of you know, the coaching industry, it can be relatively volatile. And some coaches feel very unstable in their career, that, well, if I screw up this one thing, then it's all over for me. And a lot of these coaches were worried about the club level, the college level, and they were worried about, specifically for them, wins and losses. But those who felt more stable, yes, you know what, if I have a bad season, it's okay, because I know I'm not going to get fired. And so if you end up either moving beyond coaching and going into administration, that's something important to think about too, is if you want your coaches to be creative, you need to let them fail. If anyone's ever done a practice plan of something new, and we'll talk about this, is like you do that practice plan of something you've never done before, and halfway through you're like, oh, this is not going well. That is what I'm talking about. But and this is my argument, is that if we try out those things, we're more likely to come up with something that is really new and useful. So I have presented a very short snippet of a lot of research and a lot of ideas. But before we move into the activity side of things, I did want to, really open it up in terms of, questions, because I wanted to make sure I address any questions before we jump into those activities.
Hi, Natalie. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
With regards to the research that was conducted, was there any limitations with the amount of sports you were able to capture with the athletes you were interviewing?
Yeah, and so I only looked at women's soccer because it was related to a larger project I was doing related to the Women's World Cup that happened in France in 2019. My GA is working on a research project right now related to coaches of all sports. And he's found that somewhat the same results in terms of other sports, that this idea of being able to adapt and feeling not just able in terms of capacity, but also in terms of support from their organization, that if they're able to try out things and potentially fail, that's okay. And so that's a great question. Yeah, so it's been replicated a little bit in terms of other sports. But I will tell you, if you at all are interested in research in general, is that this is an area that is severely lacking in research, specifically looking at coaches and their creativity.
Thank you.
We all want to develop a Messi, but we don't want to be the Messi of coaching ourselves, just to reference whoever put on the whiteboard about Messi.
Hey, Natalie, I got a question.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, so I was just wondering if there were any research done in like innate personality types in coaches that are more apt towards creativity versus not.
No. No, that's the easiest way to answer. No. So general creativity research has indicated things that are, willingness to adapt, open-mindedness, even curiosity and fun, which fun is not really a personality trait, but or a personality type, but those playfulness, I was trying to think of what the word was. Playfulness is that those people tend to be more creative. However, and again, this is not coaching specific research, this is just general creativity research, is engagement in the creative process is actually a higher indication of creative production than a personality type. So people who have personality types who are going to be more likely to engage in these activities and engage in trying out new things and all of those. However, the actions, the engagement is much more effective. So if you're somebody, not you specifically who asked the question, but I meant you generally, this is a limitation with the English language. You generally, if you have a fear of being creative, or you have I have a coworker who identifies as very lacking in creativity, and yet she produces very innovative ideas all the time. We published a paper. I basically published a paper about her. Is that it doesn't impact you as much as the action side of it, which is why that research has sort of motivated me to get my students, and what we're going to do next is get people to engage in these creative activities, because the more you do it, even those who don't have that personality type, you can still end up being more creative.
All right, cool.
Yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, so it's less like a personality type, more action orientated, like what you want to do, what you're willing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a lot of research on creative personalities, and I'm not discounting that research. However, the things that I've read have indicated that those people, yes, they're more likely to be creative, right? You think about those big C kind of creative people. However, it's not, hope is not lost for the rest of us. That engagement in the creative process is actually more effective in the long run.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, these are great questions. Maybe I should change my class time to this time, because these are way more questions that I get at 8:15 in the morning.
So Natalie, one, I was just hoping that you could kind of summarize, not just again, kind of what you thought as like additional facilitators to creativity, in addition to things like being, having an enabling environment where you can take risks. But could you just kind of summarize some of the other factors again? Because I think that's really practical for this group and, Up2Us and all of our organizations, just to think about.
Yeah, and one is engagement in that creative process, but also creating building a creative work environment, which includes sort of 4 things, and the first 2 are the most important, which is participative safety. If anybody follows Adam Grant on Twitter, he talks about this a lot, but is participative safety, this idea that people feel like they can bring their ideas to the table. And this could be something you can think about in terms of your own, kids as well. Obviously that, it's a little bit different depending on what age group you have, but people feel safe to bring their ideas to the table and feel like they can share. And then the second one is a clear vision and goals. So, and I think you see this a lot in sport, is that there are written goals and there are actionable goals. What we call them, like real goals. So you have the ones that we say are our goals as coaches, right? Yeah, we want you to have fun. We want you to, right? And then you have the goals that you secretly are like in the back of your head, or maybe the parents have in the back of their head about what they hope to achieve. Like, oh, I want my kid to go to get a college scholarship. I want my kids to win a trophy. I want, those kind of that dichotomy between what we state are our goals and what we feel like are our goals is a real issue in sport. And particularly I see it with a lot of coaches that I talk to. And so having clarity of what your actual goals are and moving actions toward that vision and toward that goal clarity, that helps improve people's willingness to be, or helps improve creativity. I shouldn't say willingness. It helps people's creativity because if you know where you're headed, you know if your idea is useful. Because new ideas are great, but a new idea for me and a new idea for that professor at University of Tennessee who teaches a 1-1 and has $100,000 in grant money, very different situations. We are not a rich institution here in Eastern Tennessee, and so having an understanding of what the goals are and what the vision is, then everybody in the room can start thinking about ideas and problems and information related to that. And so it helps improve that likelihood that you're going to get creative ideas, which again refers to that sort of new and useful. And then the last 2 are group task orientation. So the idea that the whole group is working together toward something, and that shared belief in whatever the vision is or whatever the task is. So the more people that are connected and sort of believe in that, they don't necessarily have to all agree about how you achieve it, but it's this idea that we're all moving toward this. And then the fourth one is support for innovation, which usually indicates both like verbal encouragement or monetary encouragement is very complicated. Anyone here is a parent would probably say that they recognize that. But verbal encouragement, time, is something that we don't often consider as a resource, but yet is obviously so important. Many of you are thinking about that right now in terms of your time resource. And those are different ways that an organization or a group can, or a coach can allow for creativity. Something I didn't mention actually relates to that is that there's some research out there by this awesome guy at Texas that players' general creativity is highest when they've spent half their time playing structured sport and half their time playing open sport. So free play. Not kids who only played free play, and not kids who only played structured. People who played only structured sport are the least creative as adults. People who played half and half are the most creative. And this is a general creativity test. And then people who played only unstructured are in between that. So those are sort of very specific, and I can even talk very practically too, but those are sort of general areas of, you know, encouraging creativity in the workplace or in the team or in the organization.
That's great. Thanks so much for that.
God, I feel like I delved into my dissertation on that one.
Natalie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I had a quick question. Do you ever see a disconnect between like having ideas but then implementing them? So like coaches or anybody can come up with these really great ideas, but the process of actually putting them into practicality can be challenging. Do you see disconnects or ways to overcome that?
Oh, I love this question because yes, so the innovation process, and this is where academics just get real academic-y, is they're like, so creativity is the idea of producing new and useful ideas. And innovation is the analysis of those ideas and implementation of those ideas. And yes, those second and third steps of the innovation process is incredibly hard. Something interesting about coaching is that essentially, depending on your structure, is that you are almost an entrepreneur. You know, you're the one who wakes up every day and decides what's going to happen in your team. Depending on what I've often seen with coaches that, they create from A to Z. They create everything, and the person above them may only be, they may know nothing about that particular sport. And so that can be really exciting in the sense that you have a lot of control, those practice plans, that type of stuff. It's also really intimidating in the sense that you may not have the right support. So in that implementation and analysis state, well, first you analyze it and then you implement it. Is in the analysis stage, that's where that vision clarity and that goal clarity comes into play. And a lot of this is real time. I will say a lot of this is iterative. I can create graphs and charts to tell you how to do this, but in reality, I know all of you are like real time. I have a problem. I need to solve it relatively quickly. Or maybe it's a larger problem and you need to think about it more long term. Is that in that analysis stage is going back to that vision, going back to those goals. And that consistency can help weed out some of the things that maybe aren't in line. Maybe they're great ideas, but they're not in line with that vision. And then there's the feasibility side. And this is interesting because what you actually may have to do, and this is the hard part, is that if you're like, oh, we don't have the time for this, we don't have the money for this, is you may have to go back and get creative about how you would achieve that. And so engage again in the creative process about, okay, what do we do if we don't have enough money for this? What do we do if we don't have enough resources for this? And then in the implementation phase is that it's all about one, consistency and implementation, and then evaluation. And I know that this, especially the evaluation side, I know that this is something that y'all talk about a lot, is when you know what your goals are that you hope to achieve, it's much easier to evaluate whether or not that innovation is successful. And then you start the whole process all over again and again, and it's iterating. You're constantly iterating. And something that, and this is like a whole different set conversation, is this idea of iterating in small ways. So if you have a really large innovation that you want to try, a great example of this, my advisor who works in sport development, when I was in my PhD, is that she advised a local park and rec program to, because she was like, you have a bunch of kids on the sidelines, they're not doing anything. Like we're not really developing athletes here. She, said, okay, what if we had no subs, like ever, and we just evened out the teams depending on who showed up? And people sort of like freaked out about it. And however, it wasn't feasible from a large scale. And so, well, it was feasible. It wasn't feasible politically from a large scale. Let's say that. And so they iterated it at a very small scale. So they looked at it at only one age group. They looked at it only one sport. And so utilizing that and measuring that and then expanding it potentially into larger situations is something that can be really powerful in terms of making that innovation successful. And then the last point, and I feel like I've just introduced a whole set of other things, is the innovation champion. And this, every single piece of research I've ever read related to sport innovation says this is true, is that there has to be one person or a small set of people who are dedicated to seeing this innovation succeed. And it doesn't necessarily matter if it's somebody at the top or somebody at the bottom. It's that consistent effort, because innovation is hard. I love innovation and creativity because it's like the positive aspects of organizational change. But like change is hard. And we're dealing with this right now at ETSU. But having that person, having that small group of people that are dedicated has been proven to show that innovation is more likely to succeed with that sustained effort. That was a lot. I feel like I really took that question and like went into a whole other direction.
Well, thank you. That was great.
I want to make sure, do we have, I don't know when, do you want me to move into the activities? I feel like I want to make sure I have time for that.
I think so. Yeah, let's move into the activity.
Okay, so this is, and I will say, I study both innovation and creativity, but creativity is sort of the thing. I love the beginning step. And so I'm not, again, like you said, with the implementation side, right? It's still an issue, and I'm not trying to sort of gloss over that. But in sport, what I've found is that too often we head into that implementation phase when we should spend a little bit more time in the creative process phase. So going back to the creative process. So this is the creative process. We identify problems. If anybody here has, we're talking about personalities, anyone here has a more like negative personality, you're like, I can identify problems all the time. Super easy. That's not what I'm talking about. As I'm talking about identifying a problem or identifying a set of problems and choosing one of those problems and looking at that problem deeper. So looking at that problem from, is it an individual issue? Is it a group issue? I'm thinking about coaching, right? Is it internal to the team? Is it external, related to your organization? What is the scope? What is the complexity of that problem? Mind mapping is a great way. And then inevitably, it always goes back to, your vision and your values. Is this a problem that needs to be addressed right away? And so you're going to understand a lot about what that problem is. And then the second thing you're going to do, and we're going to focus mostly on idea generation today because it's the most fun, but is that you're going to find out information. And like I said, right, that network of support, something like Up2Us, or, even conversations, I connect with a lot of people on social media, is I get a lot of ideas from them. And, where do you find information about your problem? And I know you've talked to people who are neuroscientists, and, that's really exciting because that is going to bring a whole breadth to the problems that you're dealing with. And then we're going to move into idea generation, and we're going to do an exercise right now. So if you have a pen and paper, I know this is like super old school, or it could be your phone, but actually research indicates handwriting is more effective, but that's okay if you just want to use your phone, is that I want you to think of a problem that you're dealing with right now. Perhaps not something that is incredibly complex, because really we should go through a much more in-depth process engagement. But I want you to think about a problem right now. And, you know, and I'm going to time you. And so I'm going to talk about it first. Don't start ideating yet. Is you're going to think about that for about 30 seconds, maybe 45. I'll give you 45. You're going to think about it for 45 seconds. Don't write anything down. Okay. Just think about the problem. Think about the underlying issues. Think about, you know, anything that you've read recently about it. What have people said to you about it? Okay. And then I'm going to time you. And for a minute and a half, you're going to come up with as many solutions as you can. And the key to this is that it's quantity over quality. Okay. So as you think about this, so you have 45 seconds to think. Don't write yet. Don't cheat. This is when you do it in person, then you can, like, you know, swat people's pencils out of their hands. But I'm trusting all of you today is that you're gonna have 45 seconds, and then in a minute and a half, you're gonna come up with as many ideas as you can. Okay. And then we're gonna talk about kind of why after we do it. Okay. So let me pull up a little timer. Probably not 20 minutes. That would be a very long time. So you have 45 seconds, and then you will have to think, and then you will have a minute and a half to write. And again, quantity, not quality. Okay, so start thinking. Start writing. You have a minute and a half. Go. Quantity. Thirty seconds left. Ten. Time. Put down your pencils or your pens or your whatever. Okay. How many, does anybody have more than 20 ideas? My favorite is when people just look, they're like, 20? Who has 20 ideas? And maybe somebody does, I don't know. Does anybody have more than 15 ideas? Does anybody have more than 10 ideas? Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's awesome. All right. I love it. Okay. So in a minute and a half, as you continually get used to this, is that you should probably be able to create at least 20 solutions. Now, for those of you who got more than 10, how many of them would you rate as quality ideas? Who, just somebody shout out.
Like 4.
Yeah, what is that like? I mean, unless you're a baseball player, what is that like? That's not a, it's not a great percentage, right? But Eric, you did exactly what you're supposed to do. Okay. What did you do? Quantity. How many ideas did you end up having?
12.
12. Yeah. And that is usually in the first go, people really range. It's usually like people have like 4 ideas, or, usually it maxes out around 12 or 13. Okay.
I feel bad because I have about 4 ideas.
Okay. Don't ever feel bad about this. And I appreciate you saying that, because this is a really good reminder, is that this is like any other skill. Any other skill. I will tell you, I am terrible at sports, like terrible. Okay. I played left bench at a D3 school that went 1-16. Okay. I am not good. And yes, but you can get better, right? So some of us have already done this and we didn't realize we were doing it. And some of us, this is the very first time you've ever done it. Well, I don't know about y'all, but the first time I ever did Kung Fu, it was like laughable. And I was with like the little kids, because I'm an adult learning Kung Fu, and there's not a lot of adults who are like, yeah, I'm going to learn how to do Kung Fu. So I was learning it with these little kids who could do things that I cannot do with my legs. And yet after a while, you could see, okay, I'm getting better at this. You can see progression. And so with this exercise, and this is something you continually practice, is that it's really not about quality. It's about quantity, because this is the stage where all we do is loosen that brain of ours. Especially as adults, we get so caught up in our head. And there's so many, I'm not a creative person, or, oh, this problem is so complex, or, oh, somebody has a better idea than me. I'll just find one of those. But this is about doing this over and over again. And there's another reason that we do only a minute and a half, because a minute and a half is hard. Creativity research indicates that constraint is actually really helpful. So often when we think about creativity, we're like, oh, I'm gonna take a weekend to think of ideas. If anyone's ever written a paper or anything, right, you really want to give yourself a deadline. It's amazing how much more I write when I, for example, have a deadline on Friday. I've done more writing this week than I did in the last 6 months. And so those kind of constraints can be really helpful for your brain and I do not know the neuroscience of this, so that's a different professor out there. But it's really helpful for you in terms of kind of just getting over yourself, to start loosening up, not literally, but metaphorically loosening up your brain. So I want to go to the next one, but this is one that if you teach students or you're teaching other coaches, is that have them do it again. I don't really have the time right now, but because I want to move to the next one, but have them do it again. And you can see people's improvement, because inevitably we naturally want to see if something is feasible, right? Because it's think about any brainstorming session you've ever been in. Somebody suggests an idea and somebody else goes, we can never do that. There's a lot of examples of things that's not true, especially in sports, right? It wasn't that long ago that women weren't allowed to run the marathon. Like, we could never do that. And yet here we are. So that's something that I just encourage anybody who wants to do this is just continue to practice it and you will see improvement. And interesting enough is you'll actually see improvement in the quality too, because of just that practice of that engagement. So the second thing that we're going to do is it's called juxtaposition. And it's this idea of bringing two different things together that are sort of maybe disparate or don't seem related. And we're going to come up with something new with it. And so I've come up with one, and but you can do this with a lot of different things. I've done it with a toaster and a cloud. and you're like, those are really random things. You know, I've done it with, no, I can't think of any more. But anyway, it can be two very different things. But what we're going to do now, and again, time limit, give yourself time limits. Do not give yourself a day. Is that for a minute and a half is you're only going to come up with one idea. And you're going to come up with a warm up using only a tennis ball and 10 feet of rope. It's very important. It's 10 feet. Okay. And if you don't know what 10 feet is, it's twice the size of me. Okay, I'm not quite 5 feet, but I'm a little bit taller than that. But so 10 feet of rope and a tennis ball. And I don't care what sport you coach. That's not related to that. It's a warm up. So think about the goals and the vision of what is a warm up. Why do we do warm ups? And then think about the resources that you have. You have a tennis ball and you have 10 feet of rope. Okay. So those two things, you want to keep those two things in mind. And so, all right, you're going to have a minute and a half. And if anyone's going to be willing to share at the end, then we're going to do that. So minute and a half, you're going to come with a warm up, thinking about that vision, that goal, why we do warm ups in sports. And then you have only two resources, which is a tennis ball and 10 feet of rope. All right, go. Ten seconds. Time. All right. Now, again, these are just exercises, right? I will tell you my idea, terrible. I don't know. This brain of mine, it's just a lot happening. I'll share mine at the end. So you reckon for those of you who are like, I think mine is equally as bad, you'll hear mine. And so then you'll be like, oh yeah, no, that was an awful one. And that's okay, right? It's okay to be like, whoo, not my greatest work. That's all right. That's not what the purpose of this is. So is anybody like, oh, I had a little something that was unique. I like this, and is willing to share?
I had an idea that people could jump rope while someone throws balls at them to catch, and you cycle through.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Right? It involves some physical, right? So it's a warm up. So we're trying to get people physically active. It's fun because that seems hard. But also, what sport do you coach?
I don't really coach a sport. I just work at Up2Us Sports, but I am a runner, so I feel like I'm familiar with that. But this can be good for like soccer if you're a goalie, or hockey if you gotta like catch stuff.
But it can also be good for runners, because it's low stakes. It doesn't relate to their actual skills, right? It's really about them getting warmed up, and then maybe particularly for sports, I swam, and watching my swimming teammates do land training was always amazing to me, because they like couldn't run correctly. It's amazing to watch people who don't know how to run. But it was actually a really good way for them to loosen up emotionally, because they're like, oh, well, at least I'm better at swimming, right? So if somebody's having a really bad swimming season, at least they're like, well, at least I swim better than I run. This is hilarious. So even for a sport like running, I love that, because it's everybody's getting physically moving. We're having a bit of fun, and maybe we're even like, oh gosh, I'm really either really good at this, or oh, at least I'm better at the sport I actually play. I love that idea. Does anybody else have another one?
Yeah, I had an idea. I actually do something a little bit similar with a step ladder, but you can use the rope and you can kind of make the infinity sign, or the 8, and just have them step through. And as they're stepping through sideways through the sign, catching the ball, and then stepping, going backwards, and then you can flip it and go, on each side of it. And another thing you can do is balance. So they balance on one leg and one hold of the rope while they're catching a ball with the offhand, and then switch legs and switch hands. And that works on balance. It works on hand-eye coordination. It does a number of effects.
Yes. And so you said that you do this with a step ladder, like basically this idea.
Yeah.
Fantastic example of adapting something that you've done previously, or adapting something that you've seen somewhere else, but utilizing the resources that you currently have. And so still new and useful, right? So still useful because but like you said, right, it involves coordination, it involves balance, it involves, all of these different lateral motion, all these different skills that, obviously depending on the age group, right, this is something that's really important. I mean, it's important in all age groups, but things that you might want them to develop. But, you're utilizing, hey, all I've got is this 10 feet of rope. And if I don't know if anyone else has coached, I coached at a D3 college that had very few resources. And I often would have like 7 people at practice. And you think like those were the most fun times in terms of creativity, right? Is those limited resources that you have and trying to come up with something new. That's fantastic. I love these. So these are great. Does anybody else have a final one that you're like, this is totally different than the previous 2? Or do you have a lot that are similar to that?
I have one. Mine is, so yeah, I was thinking about the step ladder, but also like we always do like, how's your day or something, or like something like you have to sing. So you like throw the ball around like it's hot potato, and then everyone just like loosens up, and it's kind of like silly time before practice.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? It's just adding in those elements of fun, of silliness, of getting to know each other, depending on, how well your players know each other. And so these are all great. And some of you utilize information that you already had. Some of you utilized, just the resources that are available to you right now. And you did it in a minute and a half. I will tell you my idea, because I think it's just not very good. And that's okay, because that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is for you to start exercising this. This is a skill, just like any other skill. The skills we teach our students, the skills we teach our players, right, is that developing that skill. So my idea was that the entire team would hold the rope, but actually try to play against each other in like a soccer sort of tennis ball type situation. And then I thought that is a huge liability, because essentially it's Red Rover. And, we've all banned Red Rover because of the amount of kids who have broken their arm from that event. And so I was like, immediately I was like, yeah, that's not my best work, but that's also okay. Right. It's like, I'm not here right now to say that's a terrible idea. What I'm here right now is to say, okay, you know what it sounds like right now is that I need to do some time engaging in creativity. For me in particular, this time of the year is a really hard time to be creative because there's so much going on. And so it's like, that's a signal to me. If I'm really struggling with coming up with something that is at all interesting, is I'm like, okay, I recognize that I'm not giving myself the time and the resource to practice these ideas. And so it's not, again, about you identifying as like, it's not, I'm not a creative person. It's that idea was not creative. And what that means is I need to spend a little more time practicing doing these things, which I definitely do right now. So for some reason, everything's due at the end of February. I don't know why. That's just how it feels. So the last one we're going to do, and it's going to be very short because I know we don't have a lot of time, is, and we're not going to share these, but I just want to talk you through it. It's called The Worst Idea Ever. And yes, my idea was pretty bad, but you can actually get much worse. And the exercise and the purpose of this exercise is, it's about, we often talk about thinking outside the box, but it's really hard to start in the box and think outside of it. And what you do with the worst idea, and again, giving yourself a time limit, and try to encourage, if you do this for yourself, or don't think about violent solutions, but still think about really terrible ideas, is go as far as you can to, how bad can that idea be? And I really want you to encourage you, if you decide to engage in that activity, or if you do it with other people, is give a prize for the worst idea. I once had a class where I asked them to do this exercise, and their solution was to it was like, we have to fill this facility with programming. What kind of programming should we create? And somebody was like, let's just burn the facility down. And you're like, that's a really terrible idea. It's a really, 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 really bad idea, right? How you're going to solve the problem? You don't have to worry about programming if you burnt the facility down. That's a terrible idea, right? That's not in line with the goals and the vision of the organization. However, by doing that, being so far outside the box, rewarding that behavior, is that then we're able to, okay, what are some elements of that we could potentially build into future ideas? And we were able to talk a lot about different, even fire safety programming and all sorts of other interesting ideas that actually are in line with the organization vision. So that's the final one. And, we kind of touched on it, is that after you do all of these exercises and you do them multiple times, then you talk about feasibility, and then you talk about implementation, which kind of I talked about a little bit. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I still want to make sure that there's at least one question or two questions that I could answer before we end.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess with the first activity, I only had a few ideas as well, and some of it is, I work in ultimate frisbee, and I am not able to coach it in person as much. I'm more in the development side of things, and it's been a few years since I've coached. So I guess I don't know, would you recommend just doing research on drills and building that network up just to help foster those ideas?
Yeah, I think that second stage of idea of information searching, and I would say also, I love coach specific things. I love sport specific things, but I also would say is think even broader. I'm lucky. I go running with some neighbors of ours who happen to be film professors, and we're both in education, but such different areas of education. And it's really exciting to sort of just understand what they do and learn from them in that informal setting, that I can gain ideas that are even helpful for sport. So I think those three things because the more you can gather information from diverse sources, the more likely you're when you do that ideation, when you do get into the idea generation, you'll be more likely to generate just fascinating things. So yeah, it's a great question. You guys have the best questions. These people step up.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I want to make sure that we have time, everyone, to just give a huge thank you to Dr. Natalie Smith. Drop your snaps, your emojis, reactions, thanks in the chat, everything. Thank you so much, Natalie, for this session and all the activities. These are really, really practical and applicable ideas that we can take with us. And second, we also want to thank everyone for joining our session today. Look out for details for our next session. The tentative date right now is March 24th. It's a Wednesday, and it'll be facilitated by Hello Insight on their new report showing the impact of sports-based youth development programs on social emotional learning skills among youth. So we're really excited for that. But once again, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As stated in the chat, we'll follow up with an email, including a recording and other resources that were referenced today. So thank you again.
And always feel free to always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you want to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.